The very first recollection I have of life is still very vivid. It is that of a 3.5-year-old child, sitting naked in a huge old-fashioned bathtub, having his head pushed and held under water by a fat, elderly Catholic nun. This cruel circumstance came about because of a situation in which my dear mother found herself. To fully understand her predicament, I must first explain some of the background which led to this. My mother, Grace Helen Fulgham, was born May 5, 1910 in St. Louis, Missouri. She was the middle daughter in a family of 3 girls, Laura, France and Ruth, and an older brother Thomas. Her father and mother, Norman and Mary, were Catholic and of Irish-English heritage. From all I remember, and was later told, the union of my grandparents, although fruitful, was not a very happy one. Grandfather Norman's occupation appeared to be closely associated with liquor, such as bootlegger, bartender, and saloon keeper. This proved unfortunate. Like most Irishmen, he enjoyed his booze but could not handle it. He was small in stature, only 5 feet, 2 inches, but when imbibing, thought he was John L. Sullivan, stood ready to prove it to one and all, male or female. My memory of him is that of a jolly little man when sober, but who could be a miserable tyrant otherwise. Grandmother, who was large enough to make 2 of him, was utterly terrified whenever he came home juiced. On those occasions she and the family, except my mother, would flee to neighboring homes seeking sanctuary. My mother would remain behind because she was the only one sufficiently unintimidated to handle him. When he was put to bed and sound asleep, she would alert the rest of the family that it was safe to return home. As time went by, the family gradually drifted apart. Tom, still in his teens, found a job in a grocery store and moved out. Laura, the oldest daughter, married and became a beautician, with mother filling in as her assistant. Ruth, the youngest, moved into the home of neighbors, a childless, elderly couple named Jones, who loved and later adopted her. Grandmother divorced grandfather and went to work for a family named Sachs, where she met and later married their son Edgar. He was a meek and quiet middle-aged man who worked for the postal department. Grandfather never remarried but continued his lifestyle of drinking and raising hell and still managed to survive to a ripe old age. Soon after the family break-up, my mother met a personable, blond, handsome fellow named George Orr. She was 15 years old and he was 17. Both were healthy, foolish and infatuated with each other, thus I was conceived. The aftermath was, as usual in cases such as this, that Father George took a hike. Mother found herself up the old proverbial creek, stigmatized and persona non grata to both family and friends. The only person offering solace, and a degree of understanding, was her sister Laura, who was expecting her first child. Somehow mother managed to survive her pregnancy, and on May 29, 1926, 3 weeks after her 16th birthday, I was born in the House of Good Shepherds, a St. Louis Catholic home for unwed mothers. She named me James Edward Fulgham and I was baptized Catholic. In spite of extreme pressure and strong advice from many quarters in favor of adoption, mother remained adamant in keeping me. For her, this could be the only decision, although being a very formidable one. To appreciate this fact, one must well comprehend the devilish Puritan mentality existing at that point in time. Living in legal, so-called holy wedlock, plus being born therein, was the only game in town. Anyone caught cheating did so at their own social peril because forgiveness was not in the least considered a divine quality. Mother, however, was indifferent to the opinions of rock-throwing hypocrites and never once did she deny me. Although a small girl, 5 feet, 1 inch, she was like a lioness with her cub. Protective, fearless and proud. I still remember the looks we received when Mother would directly correct people who thought we were brother and sister. 7 months after my birth, my mother married a man by the name of Wesley Nobe, pronounced Nobe. To screen my illegitimacy, I was given his surname in a Lutheran church ceremony. At 7 months old I had an alias plus 2 religious affiliations. We moved to a small German farm community near St. Louis. German was mostly spoken and, therefore, became my first language. Mother's marriage lasted about 3 years and produced a male child named Harold, who died in infancy. Mother explained the reasons for the breakup as being the constant interference of Wesley's family and their influence over him. They treated her as a child and doted on me as a little Prussian prince with a possessiveness she found intolerable. Also, my speaking broken English did not sit well with her. Although this was 1930 and the country was undergoing a Great Depression, Mother decided to return to St. Louis, where she managed to find a job. She arranged to board me at St. Anne's Catholic Home for Children, where she could visit me on Sundays. Although I lived at the home for over a year, there are only 4 things I distinctly remember about the place. I remember the nightly routine when groups of us children were led into a large, white-tiled room in which there were rows of high lion-footed bathtubs. We were then told to undress and climb in, handed soap and cloth, and warned in no uncertain terms to wash ourselves clean, or we would be punished. At any rate, it soon became apparent that no matter how hard I scrubbed myself, the old nun in charge would not be satisfied with the results. She never failed to grab me by the back of the head, pushing it under water, and proceed to see how close she could come to drowning me. Suffice to say, these grim experiences introduced me to cruelty and terror, particularly after having been acquainted with only love and kindness. Years later I concluded this warped bitch was just one of life's many frustrated losers who, if given the slightest opportunity, would abuse anyone or anything deemed adequately helpless. I remember the Sundays my mother would visit and take me for walks around the neighborhood. This included buying me a well-anticipated strawberry ice cream cone. I did not know it at the time, but years later, Aunt Laura told me Mother walked miles to the children's home in order to save the money for my first treat. After paying for my board and her expenses, she had little left from her small salary. I recall those poignant endings of each Sunday's visit. I do not know who cried the most, knowing it would be a dispirited week until we could see each other again. These were hard and miserable times, for all we had was each other. The last thing I remember is the explosive fury I unleashed when I finally apprised my mom about the nightly bathing occurrences. She marched me straight into the Mother Superior's office and demanded my belongings forthwith. Mother Superior stated children could not be released without notice. There were certain procedures to follow that took time to finalize. Not to be put off, my aggravated mother conveyed that if my things were not delivered at once, she would start taking the place apart, brick by brick. This also applied to anyone else who got in the way. No little indignant, Mother Superior hauntingly retorted that she was going to call the police and they would settle the matter. Not intimidated, Mom told her to go ahead and make the call, but she would have the shit knocked out of her long before the police arrived. She also informed the shocked nun that the police and everyone else in the place would be tipped about the shabby, sick treatment being inflicted on the wards in their charge. Obviously realizing she was caught between a hornet's nest and a bucket of worms, Mother Superior cut through the red tape tout de suite. I was less than 5 years old when indelibly exposed to the power of persuasive communication. The next year and a half, though not exactly perfect, was quite an improvement. I spent most of my time with a King Lutheran family who never tired in reciting Bible stories and instructing me in the ways of a true Christian. Mother paid them to look after me Monday through Friday, with us sharing the weekends together. The only negative treatment I recall during this period involved a huge red rooster the family kept. This big old bird claimed the entire backyard as his exclusive territory and would greet me with wings and claws assailing whenever I ventured out. I soon learned he had me far outclassed, so I elected to avoid future encounters with him. Apparently the family grew tired of my playing in the house all of the time because one day he became the dinner's main course. After that the yard was my domain to play in while eagerly awaiting the weekend. Sometime after my 7th birthday mother married Daniel, Harry, Bone, who would subsequently serve as a sorry excuse for a stepfather over some 15 trying years. Once again I was given a new surname owing to the fact divorcees, and even widows, were stigmatized when remarrying in those erstwhile days.